Well, I'm extremely happy that we can interview on this Mycological Congress in San Juan, Brenda and Mike Wingfield. And I think this is quite unique that I can interview a mycological couple, which is, I think, very interesting. Let me start with Brenda. Brenda, where were you born and how did you come into mycology?
Well, I was born in Zambia, so I'm truly an African, and yeah, I guess I came into mycology actually through my husband, because I don't have actually formal training in mycology. It was really our research interests started to get closer and closer. I'm a trained geneticist and biochemist, and I've been telling Mike for years that DNA is where it all is at, and he's finally got with the plot.
Okay, so you met before you did mycology together.
Yes.
This is correct.
This is interesting.
Let me give my perspective and a little bit of context. So I'm an African also, born and bred in South Africa. My parents are African and South African, and their parents came to South Africa as young children. So we're truly an African family, and very proud of that. I went to university first at the University of Natal in Pietermaritzburg. It's somewhere near Durban, quite close to Durban, and that's where we met. So Brenda came there. I think her first year was my fourth year, or end of the third year, and we met there, and the relationship began, and it had absolutely nothing to do with fungi or mycology from Brenda's perspective. She's a biochemist, really, biochemist, geneticist, but I started in my undergraduate years to take a great interest in fungi, and I think an important context there is I had a professor. I had to make a choice between plant pathology and entomology as a career, and did both of those for a long time, and in fact most of my career I kept both entomology and pathology together. But I had a professor, a remarkable woman, who was a student originally of Johan Westerdyk.
Oh, what she was?
Yes.
Okay. What was her name then?
Sarah Truter.
Okay, yes, I know that name.
She was highly eccentric, of course loved fungi. I remember her vividly. I was always a happy student, and I was one day walking down the passage and whistling, and she stopped me and said, "Do not whistle, it's inappropriate." So she had very fixed ideas. She had a very strong Dutch culture, but she really loved the fungi, and she took us out on my first foray, and I got to see fungi. I suppose it was in my second or third year, and really took an interest in the fungi at that point. Yeah. So I'd say probably, and it's this Westerdyk connection, but Sarah Truter was the beginning of my interest. Okay. I then was a plant pathology student, and that's where Brenda more or less comes in. So the beginning of, for us it was a fourth year, and I was studying.
How many years are you married now?
Way too many years. We're going on for 40 years. So
40 years.
So we will. Next year is 40 years. So this year, 39 years.
Yeah, I'm married
way too
48
long.
years.
Yes.
48 years. So
and you have two children, I guess?
We have two children. Anthony.
How could you manage this? You know, your career and your family. This is always a problem.
I mean, I've always said that one of the ways in which we've been able to manage it is that we have respect for each other and that we've supported each other's careers.
Yeah, that's okay.
Yes.
But you have a family, so you have to take care of the children and the schools.
I mean, I've been saying for years to most of my colleagues, love me, love my children, and so my children have been taken with me wherever I've gone, whatever I've done, and I've written a bit about this whole idea. People talk about wanting to have some kind of life outside work, and I have so much fun in my work. Yeah. I don't think I need to have a life outside.
Most mycologists think mycology is great. It's just and even now I'm retired, and I still every day do mycology.
Yes.
And my friends, which are not who are not mycologists, they can say, well, "Why are you not golfing?" I said, "What should I do on the golf place?" No,
you're having
Well,
way more fun doing mycology.
Let me tell you a story about golf in that case. On one occasion, Brenda's mother, who is a very upright, quite shy, perhaps conservative British lady, came to stay with us. And one day I got home and she said, "I have a gift for you." And she handed me this package, and inside was a tie. And the tie was full of golf balls. And I said, "Mom, I don't understand this." And she said, "Well, every time you're at work all the time and you say my work is like my golf course, so here's a tie for you." So there is a story there. But in terms of mycology, and I don't want to get into Brenda's way of this in this discussion, but people for many years have seen me as a taxonomist, as a fungal taxonomist. In fact, our friend and mutual colleague Pedro Kraus says, "Well, you're a taxonomist." And I said, "Well, this is not true. I'm really a plant pathologist, and really all of my work in my career has, in the latter years, been to do with the health of trees and fungi that are important in terms of tree pathogens." But the story behind that is quite interesting. When I started my first job, I was told to work on tree diseases. I was very, very angry about this because my university time, that fourth year, I had a project on peanut diseases, and I really, really enjoyed that. But I owed money to the government. The government had supported my studies, and they said, "Well, we need somebody to study the diseases of trees. So you need to go and do that." And I said, no, this is not going to happen. I'm going to do peanuts. And they said, "Well, you owe us money, pay up or start doing this." So my first project in forest pathology was to plant peanuts, because I was determined that I would at least keep studying peanut diseases, and I'd do this forestry thing as well. But where I got interested in the taxonomy side was in the second paper I ever wrote. So I wrote a paper as a young master's student describing a fungus causing a disease of pine trees, or actually describing the disease, and that was submitted to Plant Disease, and it was rejected, which I was very disappointed about. And the rejection was because I had described this disease caused by a fungus without a species name. I said, "You can't do this, you have to have a name for the fungus." So I went to see a friend of mine, Wally Morassus, a famous, wonderful mycologist, and became one of my most important mentors. And I said, "I have a problem." And he said, "Let me help you to describe this fungus." It was called, in those days, I called it Verticlladia alacris. It's had a long and interesting taxonomic history. But he handed me an example of a description of a species, and I wrote that paper. It went to the journal of long ago called Transactions of the British Mycological Society, and it was accepted without any changes.
Wow.
I received a letter from Brian Sutton to say, "What a beautiful paper. I've corrected a few typographical errors, and the paper is impressive." I thought, "Okay, this is it. I can do this stuff." I was really happy. That other paper then was the real problem, because that was the rejection. But I started describing fungi when I needed to, but really, my interest is strongly in the movement of fungi around the world, and those that kill trees. So my taxonomy has been behind really studying tree health and tree diseases. So Brenda's connection, we should get into this.
Proceed.
Well, look, I always say I followed Mike to the US. He had an opportunity to go and do his PhD in the States, and the only way I could join him was to marry him. So I did that. and I spent about 6 months in the States getting thoroughly bored, and registered for a master's degree, and worked on cauliflower mosaic virus, which suited my kind of biochemical genetics interests. And we went back to South Africa after Mike had finished his PhD. I completed a master's and started, I guess I worked for a while and then started a PhD looking at viruses of yeast, Saccharomyces cerevisiae.
So that's mycology, you see.
Yes,
so your first mycology was there.
That's really mycology.
Yeast is fungi, but it had nothing...
But the yeast world is a very different mycological world, and I think maybe that's where the stronger interest. the DNA is behind the basis of all characters.
Sure.
So if you've got a character, there has to be DNA, and if you can get the DNA sequence.
But you could do this
that's-
only in the last, let's say, decades or something. Before
Well,
that,
you know-
of course, you started. I don't know, in the 80s maybe.
Yes, well, we
And,
did.
yeah,
I mean,
and
we
then
were
it
talking.
was-
I mean, was it Tom talking about the PCR machines where you move from water bath to water
This is
bath?
Tom Guilfoyle, who was.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, Tom Brands was talking about PCR machines.
So
yes.
our first PCR, I believe we had the first PCR in South Africa. And this was, we used to call our PCR machine Erna Hewitt. She was a technician. And Brenda had her with hot water baths and cold water baths, and it was really, really tedious stuff. But I remember when the first PCR machine was there, that first description, in fact, in Nature, I think it was in Nature, and Brenda went to see our head of department. So we had moved from the Cape to Bloemfontein at that time, the centre of South Africa, and she went to the head of department and said, I need a machine like that. It costs a huge amount of money in those days.
Yeah.
And he just had an amazing vision. I don't know how he did it, but he said, buy it. And of course it annoyed a lot of other people because they had been asking for electron microscopes and things, and Brenda got this PCR machine. But that really, really changed our lives. Sequencing in those days was direct sequencing. It was sequencing RNA. We had a big brown blender. We'd grow up huge amounts of mycelium and grind this stuff up. Brenda was doing that.
Yeah, well, you see, I joined Cleet Kurtzman in Peoria for a couple of months and learned how they were doing the RNA sequencing.
So you were in Peoria?
Yes.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, Brenda, I stayed. She left
Mike,
me at home with her 2-year-old child, which was, I can tell you, this was
with
one of
her, too, not yours.
He is related.
This is the African machoist. Yeah.
This was one of the most dramatic things that ever happened to me. It was literally hell for a time to get used to having to actually take full care of a child. Brenda, had gone off, and this little boy was looking for her mother. I remember coming into his bedroom one day, and he had this little guitar, and he was playing this thing about so big and plastic, and he was saying, "Mommy's gone to America to look for DNA, DNA, DNA." And I was quite tearful. I was crying about that because Brenda.
Did you find the DNA? Did you find
So Brenda had really gone to be with Cleet and to learn to analyze DNA sequence. Glass plate. I have a beautiful picture of Cleet and Brenda alongside each other, reading the sequences. But when Brenda came back from that trip, she had always refused to work with me. She said, "Your shadow is big," and
also I refused to work with you until I'd completed my PhD. Because there was too much potential insider trading. Having said that, without your influence and input, I wouldn't have written my papers for my PhD. Your name is not on them, but
thank goodness for that.
Let me ask me another question, which really interests me, because the CBS, now the Westerdijk Institute, had a very good connection with all the South African mycologists, and they came over to Barn at that time, and I met quite a lot. It was funny to speak Nederlands, and you're
Afrikaans.
Well, I wonder if you remember my coming to meet you.
Yeah, so sure. You were in this very nice jacket with this very big logo of the university.
Really?
Yeah,
I don't remember that.
Yeah,
I remember
the logo.
So I in those days I was just absolutely captivated by morphology and by structures and by EM and being able to look at spore production. And your wonderful book had come out, so this is Colin Samson.
Yeah, Colin Samson.
The illustrated book.
Yeah.
And I fell in love with this book. I probably paid a ridiculous price for it, but I wanted to meet you, and I was on my way to do a PhD.
I know.
So it was coming through.
I can remember this.
I remember meeting you as a
But my
young
question,
man.
in fact, is to you is that there were so many good mycologists, and many mycologists have now gone away from South Africa. How do you see mycology, the future of mycology in South Africa? You are leaving now, or you're there, but you're still there. There are a few left, and a very good number is now in the States, in Holland, and so on. How do you see mycology in South Africa?
We might have very different opinions about
That's really nice.
I think it's the base that we've established is absolutely sustainable, and watch the space. I mean, you know, some might have escaped us, but we've got a whole lot of young ones in training. So I mean, certainly what I see is there's no reason why we can't carry on training
well, the
good
subject, fungi,
mycologists.
mycology, plant disease, and so that is still, of course, very relevant for South
Yes.
Africa. So therefore, it is good. I was always wondering, why is there no food mycology, really food mycology in South Africa? There must be, you know, tons of food spoiled and so on, aflatoxins and so on. Why is that not?
I mean, I think my
I mean,
opinion,
in some ways, that's a different question to the mycology, and I mean, maybe the short answer of why do we study forest disease? You will see Fabi is branching out in other directions, but you have to have money.
yeah. So,
And is there money?
I mean, yeah. Well, let's start on my opinion of that
Okay,
first.
sure,
first
sure,
question. You can see we don't necessarily always agree exactly on issues, which is a good thing as well. But our view, at least my view of mycology, is very different to taxonomic mycology. So, you know, you talk about people who
Now,
moved out.
I'm talking about fungal biology.
Quite a lot of
Yeah.
people that have left perhaps are more on the taxonomic side, and you know that's an evolving field as well. But mycology is really very strong. You know, if you think of out of our program in Fabi, and we can talk a little bit about where the institute came from, now 20 years old, but I think I've been involved in the graduation of 100 PhD students now. Not you know, as an advisor or a co-advisor, about 50-50. But many of those people are well established in South Africa.
Okay.
Heads of Department of Plant Pathology are mostly our past students. Of course, we have, and you touched on that, mycologists that have been with us that have moved to other parts of the world. Pedro is an example. I think he was my 4th PhD student. You know, those connections have not gone. Those connections actually have made mycology in South Africa much stronger because they're deep connections. So if you look at who we're publishing with and who we're working with
Exactly.
those that are not there are still part of this team.
No, I think so. The let's say the network in the world is of course so immense important that of course you have your national mycology, but you cannot speak anywhere about national mycology. It's all international.
It's an international issue.
Yeah.
You know, if I think about the success of our tree health program, you know, the tree health program in Fabi is the strongest, largest single tree health program in the world, by any metric you would like to take. And that has grown to a large extent because of an international network. So it started with local problems, and us, you know, being in a country like South Africa, the government doesn't put money into research, not a lot. So we've depended very strongly on having connections with commercial enterprise, so with industry. And that started with the forest industry, but it's drawn students from all over the world. I mean, there are 30, give or take 1 or 2, 30 mother tongue languages spoken in the institute. So there's students from everywhere. So the diseases that we've studied and the fungi that cause them are everywhere. You know, there are projects in just about certainly all continents and many different countries. So it's that internationalization that really makes things work. So in that, you know, from that perspective, I think mycology in South Africa is stronger than ever was, has been. You know, there are some things that have changed. Wally Marassis, who is an amazing mycologist, but really a mycotoxicologist, and his background was strongly in biochemistry. So, you know, his passing away a few years ago was incredibly sad. I mean, he was, you know, a very close friend of ours, a special mentor, and he drove the whole mycotoxin space very strongly. So internationally, South Africa, well, the discovery of fumonism, as an example, came out of his institute. And some of that is not as strong today as it was, but I see that rising as well. I mean, you know, Kobus Versace now getting involved with us, and he has an interest in that space. So, you know, some aspects have grown and some have shrunk a little bit, but looking forward, there are such strong people, and I think there are incredible opportunities.
Okay, well, we are running out of time, but I have the last question. I know you're retired now. What is your future?
Not retired.
No, okay.
I stepped down as the director of Fabi.
Explain exactly what you're doing now, or what you're going to do in the next years.
Yeah, so I, Rob, had that incredible privilege, because it was both of us, to start an institute from scratch 20 years ago. And that institute was a 55 people that came from somewhere else and has grown to a very large international institute. I made a decision to step down as the director at 20 years. Sometimes I thought I was crazy to make that decision, but I believed that for strong succession, I should do this. So I stood down as the director. I'm pre-retirement age. I'm still involved in the projects of many students around the world, and that of course continues. And I'd like to reduce some of that over the next 5 years because it's too much. I'm really tied up in some very big international projects, particularly as the president of IUFRA. That's a network of 20,000 people.
And you,
globally.
Brenda,
I'm younger than him.
I know.
But I look younger.
So I have a research chair in fungal genomics.
Yeah, I know. And
So I
you
have money. I pay my own salary, and I can, at a certain level, do what I want to do, which is fantastic.
So
Yeah.
we're certainly not stopping. I've agreed with the University of Pretoria to take a 5 to 7 year term at a higher strategic level, helping the university develop some new projects and programs, and that's going to be about half my time, and the rest is going to be mycology and tree disease. So lots of things, and it's always health depending on whether one's okay. But
so we see you both then very frequently still in Holland.
Oh, absolutely. You can't get rid of us.
Okay, thank you very much, Brenda.
Thanks very much.
Great to talk with you.
Love
Thank you so much.
Nice to talk with you.